The baby began to cry the moment he saw her, and not the soft, needy cry adults expect from infants, but a sharp, frightened wail that cut through the marble halls like a warning siren. Conversation stopped. Footsteps froze. Every eye in the room turned toward the crib as if the sound itself had accused someone of a crime. And then, before anyone could react, the millionaire leaned forward, his face drained of color, and whispered words that would change every life in that room forever. Jonathan Hale had built an empire from nothing. At 42, he was known across the city as a man who never lost control of his business, his temper, or his carefully guarded emotions. His mansion reflected that control: spotless floors, perfectly arranged furniture, silence that felt expensive. The only thing that had ever broken that silence was the birth of his son, Oliver. Jonathan loved the child deeply, yet even that love stayed quiet, restrained, as if he feared it might vanish if spoken aloud. Oliver was 8 months old now, a calm baby who rarely cried. Doctors called him unusually observant. Nannies called him easy. Jonathan called him his miracle. That was why the scene unfolding in the nursery that morning felt so wrong. The previous maid had resigned suddenly, leaving Jonathan's household manager scrambling to find a replacement. After dozens of interviews, one candidate remained, a young woman named Grace Miller. She wasn't the most experienced, nor the most confident, but there was something steady about her, something that made the manager trust her with a child who meant everything to his father. Grace stood at the doorway now, hands folded tightly, trying to hide her nerves. This was her first day. She had practiced her smile in the mirror, rehearsed calm greetings, reminded herself that this was just a job. Still, her heart pounded as she stepped closer to the crib. The instant Oliver saw her face, his small body stiffened, his lower lip trembled. Then came the cry, loud, desperate, almost panicked. Grace froze. The other staff exchanged uneasy glances. Babies cried, yes, but this felt different. "It's all right," Grace said softly, instinctively stepping back. "Maybe he just needs—" "Stop," Jonathan said sharply. His voice carried authority, but also something else, fear. Grace's chest tightened. She had barely said a word, barely moved, and already she felt she had failed. The household manager began to apologize, ready to escort her out and smooth things over. But Jonathan wasn't looking at Grace anymore. He was staring at his son. Oliver's cries grew louder, his tiny hands reaching outward, not away from Grace, but toward her. His eyes locked on her face, wide and pleading, as if he recognized something he couldn't name. Jonathan swallowed hard. "I've heard that cry before," he said quietly. The room fell into stunned silence. Grace looked at him, confused. "Sir?" Jonathan didn't answer her. His gaze remained fixed on Oliver as memories he had buried long ago forced their way back to the surface. Memories of a hospital room, a woman exhausted but smiling, a promise he had never kept. "That cry," Jonathan repeated, his voice breaking for the first time anyone could remember, "is the same cry his mother made the night she left." No one spoke. The air itself felt heavy. Jonathan took a step toward Grace, studying her face more closely now. The curve of her eyes, the nervous way she held herself, the gentleness in her expression. Something about her unsettled him, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was hauntingly close to something he had lost. "What's your full name?" he asked. "Grace." "Grace Miller, sir," she replied, her voice barely steady. Jonathan nodded slowly. "Where are you from?" "A small town outside Brighton. I moved here 2 years ago." "Why did you leave?" he pressed. Grace hesitated. She hadn't expected an interrogation. "My mother passed away," she said finally, "and I needed a fresh start." Jonathan's breath caught. Oliver's cries softened then, turning into small, broken sounds. Grace, acting on instinct, stepped closer to the crib. Without asking permission, she gently placed her finger near Oliver's hand. He grabbed it immediately, gripping with surprising strength, and his crying stopped almost at once. Gasps rippled through the room. Jonathan felt his knees weaken. He lowered himself into a nearby chair, his mind racing. "This is impossible," he murmured. Grace looked frightened now. "Sir, if I've done something wrong—" "No," Jonathan interrupted, "you haven't." He stood abruptly and turned to the household manager. "Leave us, all of you." Within seconds, the room was empty except for Jonathan, Grace, and the baby who now stared at her with calm, curious eyes. Jonathan took a deep breath. "Grace," he said, "I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to be honest." She nodded. "Did your mother ever tell you about a man she loved who chose ambition over family?" Grace's heart skipped. "Why would you ask that?" Jonathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because Oliver's mother, Elena, disappeared 8 months ago, and you look exactly like her younger sister." Grace felt the world tilt. "My mother's name was Elena," she said slowly, "but she never told me she had a sister." Jonathan closed his eyes, the truth finally crashing down around him. "She didn't," he said, "because you weren't her sister. You were her daughter." The words hung in the air, impossible and undeniable all at once. Grace staggered back, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. My mother left when you were a baby," Jonathan finished, "because she was scared, because I was cruel, because I chose money over the people I loved." Tears filled Grace's eyes as fragments of her childhood suddenly made sense. The silence around her father, the way her mother avoided certain questions, the pain she had carried without knowing why. Oliver babbled softly, as if sensing the emotional storm he had unleashed. Jonathan looked at his son, then back at Grace. "When Oliver saw you," he said, voice thick with emotion, "he recognized you. Blood remembers, even when we forget." Grace slowly approached the crib again, this time lifting Oliver into her arms. He rested his head against her chest, peaceful, safe. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hale let himself cry. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, "but I want to be better, for him, and for you." Grace looked at the man who had unknowingly shaped her entire life. She felt anger, grief, confusion, but also something unexpected, hope. "I don't know what this means yet," she said honestly, "but I know one thing. That baby doesn't need another broken promise." Jonathan nodded. "Neither do you." That day, the mansion changed, not because of money or power, but because truth had finally walked through its doors in the form of a nervous young maid, and a baby brave enough to cry when it mattered most. And in that cry, a family found its way back to itself.